For a long time in history, there were extraordinary people whose lives turned into continuous torment and exploitation for the entertainment of others. However, the story of the dwarf servant named Geoffrey Hudson, connected with the English Queen, is considered one of the most remarkable and simultaneously tragic tales. This person, it seemed, was very short in stature, only about 18 inches, roughly equivalent to 45 centimeters, and despite such a diminutive height, he did not shy away from performing deeds worthy of attention, even shocking with their cruelty and moral deformity. Born in the early 17th century in England, Geoffrey lived with his parents and three siblings. His father earned a living working for the famous Duke of Buckingham, managing some hunting bulls used for sport or entertainment. Describing his family as well off would be difficult. They continued to live in poverty. But no one could have imagined that soon a completely different problem would arise: the fate of the boy himself. As he grew older, his family began to notice that something unusual was happening to Geoffrey. He stopped growing almost immediately after birth and reached a height of only 18 inches. Interestingly, neither his parents nor his siblings suffered from similar conditions, which likely led to many unsubstantiated and sometimes very strange theories about the nature of his unusual development. For example, during that era, numerous superstitious explanations emerged to account for his atypical growth. One popular version claimed that the cause was some unfortunate accident involving his mother, who, according to some, choked on a pickled cucumber during pregnancy, which supposedly affected the child's growth. However, to be frank, there were many such explanations, mostly based on superstitions or fantasies. Modern medical knowledge would probably diagnose Geoffrey with a dysfunction of the pituitary gland, the brain's gland responsible for regulating body growth. Considering he showed no other signs of classical dwarfism, physicians might have offered him treatment to help him develop normally. However, at that time, medicine did not possess such capabilities, and most likely, due to the lack of proper diagnosis and the proliferation of various fantastic hypotheses, the boy's parents made a fateful decision. When Geoffrey was about 7 years old, his parents agreed to place him in the custody of the Duke and Duchess of Buckingham. The exact circumstances of this decision remain unknown, but according to available information, the boy was called a rare natural phenomenon, which is why their highnesses decided to take him in. How unique was he for his time? Not as much as one might confidently think. Part 2 of 10. Interestingly, in the 17th century, the growth of tiny people like Hudson was not considered particularly unusual in England. Although many did not understand the reasons for their condition, several small-sized individuals lived among the English and were met with little surprise in society. However, Hudson stood out among them due to his exceptional proportions. His physique was nearly perfectly balanced, making him very special. This trait later became his chance to rise out of poverty and attain a more comfortable life. The period when Hudson was near the Duke and Duchess is recorded in history quite vaguely. It seems that, in those years, wealthy people could regard unusual individuals indifferently, perceiving them more as unique collectibles, similar to rare artworks or gemstones. In any case, Hudson likely lived quite peacefully and comfortably with his new owners, until the moment when his size started to play a particular role, and that became nothing short of astonishing. It was a few months after his arrival with the Duke and Duchess that the famous event occurred, which would later become his bright triumph. It all began with a visit from the royal family. His new patron, the butler, and the lady of the house arranged a grand reception in honor of King Charles I and his wife, Queen Henrietta Maria. And you might wonder, where on this celebration, for some reason, was Hudson? He started being used in an unusual way, and it was precisely through this act that he unexpectedly became a celebrity. At that moment, the host decided to prepare a gigantic pie as a surprise, and then, intentionally designed so that Hudson would be inside, this was a full-fledged dessert that initially seemed completely harmless, nothing different from ordinary sweet treats. How he himself felt about being hidden in the pie is unknown. and it can be assumed that it was probably not very pleasant for him. Nevertheless, he made a spectacular and captivating entrance. Emerging proudly from the pie, dressed in armor, he displayed a symbol at the top of his small, triumphal arch. He strode across the table holding a flag, eliciting amazement and admiration from everyone present. What was the reaction of the young and unprepared queen when such an unexpected and unusual surprise appeared before her eyes? Apparently, she was absolutely delighted. Hudson not only surprised, he amused everyone gratefully, even more happily than expected. Ultimately, the Duke and Duchess, recognizing his talent for entertainment, offered him as a gift to the Queen. Thus, the little man found himself in royal service, accompanying the Queen to her castle. There, he became part of court life, firmly establishing himself within its walls for a time. For the Queen, he was probably something like a rare and original accessory or ornament, more like a precious trifle that adds exoticism and a touch of uniqueness to her surroundings. And so it went on for some time, during which this little man essentially became one of the elements of the royal court, a kind of living demonstration of wealth, uniqueness, and the characteristics of that era. Her royal palace housed a true collection of rare and unusual objects, many of which were exotic and fantastical exhibits. Among her collection, there were also several unusual living creatures: small people, a monkey, and a tailor, taller than 7 feet. These and other unique specimens served for a long time as a kind of decoration for the royal court. However, over time, despite her collection, Geraldina, the mistress of this palace, realized that her ingenious items and living exhibits occupied far more space and attention than dust on display cases or furniture, and that their presence influenced the life of the entire court. Meanwhile, among these unusual objects, a particular place was occupied by one person, Alexander Hudson. The time spent in this royal environment taught him that his unusual appearance, different from the rest, was not just a cause for uniqueness, but an opportunity to use his differences in friendly and lively situations. In fact, Hudson, despite his unusual appearance and traits, quickly felt that his individuality was becoming his strong weapon and advantage in this special world. Soon, particularly through his friendship with one of the most striking specimens of the collection, a 7-foot Welshman named William Evans, Hudson found genuine emotional closeness and trust. William Evans and Hudson became inseparable friends, so close that they could sometimes be seen together on the city streets. Even when in William's pocket, Hudson remained his companion and a bright character. Later, they came up with the idea to showcase their friendship and funny duet on stage, where William cheerfully chewed a sandwich, pulling both Hudson and bread out of his pocket, performing a comedic routine together. It's impossible to know exactly how Hudson felt about being compared to a slice of ham, but given their strong friendship, it was likely amusing and enjoyable for both. Or perhaps he simply enjoyed other privileges that came with his position, moments that made his presence at the royal court truly special and fulfilling. The more time he spent at court, the clearer it became that the skill of leveraging his peculiarities was his greatest advantage. Hudson skillfully used his charisma, wit, and ability to showcase his merits when needed. His talent did not go unnoticed, even among the majestic architectural masterpieces built for the needs of the king. A talented architect organized special social performances for him, including music, stage acts, and decorations, to entertain and impress the royal family. But fate had in store not only stage success for Hudson. As a member of the royal court, he gained the widest opportunities, both in education and in training himself in etiquette and manners worthy of nobility. He went hunting, enjoyed delicious food, and even had his own servant at his command. Moreover, all of this was far from all that allowed him to feel like part of high society. He became a participant in one of the most honorable royal traditions, riding horses through the royal gardens and competing on equal footing with the neat and noble aristocracy. For this purpose, he was given a special harness, sewn from expensive velvet and silk, an item that became the pinnacle of his well-deserved role in the imperial entourage. This step from rural simplicity to high society was significant, and although he was very pleased with everything offered to him, the vast majority of his joy and gratitude belonged to that slightly more important thing he felt inside himself. However, perhaps even more important to him was the strong fondness that the Queen quickly showed towards Hudson. Her kindness and appreciation led her to take him under her wing during several diplomatic and personal trips, endowing him with trust and affection. Ultimately, the Queen even decided to gift him an outfit, specially tailored at her request, which became yet another testament to the special attachment and trust. In this majestic world, he found himself not only as a unique exhibit or amusing friend, but also as a person truly trusted and valued for his personality, his kindness, and his sincere involvement in the life of the royal court. The same fabrics he ordered for his own children to wear as Justin, but over time, all good things eventually came to an end. Interestingly, the final chapter of his unusual and prosperous life happened precisely because of his strong connections with the royal family. The first major event that could be called royal wealth in Hudson's life occurred when he was still young. At around 10 years old, he joined a group heading from the palace to France. The purpose of this delegation was to ensure a good midwife, an obstetrician, for the pregnant queen's arrival, while Hudson was to entertain the French court at the time. The group successfully reached France, but on the way back, they faced a terrible incident. On their return journey to England, they were captured by pirates who seized their ship and caused a terrible upheaval for the 10-year-old boy. Fortunately for him, the pirates simply attacked the vessel, took everything valuable they had, and allowed the crew to continue their journey home. What is intriguing is that this dangerous incident did not stop Hudson from undertaking new risky voyages afterward. In 1637, he joined another group that set sail across the Channel. By that time, he was about 18 years old, and it seemed he was seeking thrills. Then he traveled abroad to the Netherlands, where significant military events took place involving the overthrow of the Spaniards from the scene. During the siege of Breda, the Dutch defeated the Spaniards, and Hudson, as before, remained unharmed. But soon, the situation at home in England became even more dangerous than the naval adventures. In the 14th century, a civil war erupted between supporters of the king and those who sought to overthrow his rule. During this turbulent period, the Queen left the country, going to the Netherlands and taking Hudson and other close associates from the palace. She successfully raised funds to support the king, but upon returning to England, they faced a terrible night. On the way back to England in the Yorkshire area, they stopped early in the morning to spend the night. Upon waking, they heard a terrible racket, gunfire and cannonballs flying from the enemy's side. It might seem that a young man of barely 10.5 feet in height would stay close to the Queen for his own protection. But Hudson acted differently. He, according to reports, jumped out of bed, prepared to defend the Queen and her suite. He took up arms and was ready to fight immediately to protect those he loved, showing great bravery and determination in a dangerous situation. Fortunately for him, his enemies never went beyond the ships from which they fired their artillery, thus sparing him from having to participate directly in actual combat. However, the next time the situation worsened, he still had to face danger. During another voyage home, his crew made a stop in York, where authorities supported the royal side, and it seemed there was nothing to threaten him there. But fate delivered an unexpected twist. The Queen and her court at that location were surrounded and besieged. Once again, as before, Hudson rose up to protect his queen. This time, however, the enemies did not limit themselves to distant fire, but approached closer. The conflict took on more tangible forms. In his first 20 years of life, Hudson, according to various reports, used this opportunity to demonstrate his personal importance and loyalty. Although the specific details are hardly preserved, one thing is clear. He clearly undertook something decisive, which could have included participation in hand-to-hand combat. Whether specifically or not, this is less important. The significance lies in the fact that he truly did something, because after these events, the Queen decided to reward him. Subsequently, she bestowed upon Hudson the title of Captain of the Cavalry. He took this status seriously. He carried it later in life, signing himself as Captain Jeffrey Hudson. Nevertheless, fate turned out such that the Queen, along with her court, was forced to flee to France as rebellions and unrest continued in the country. And it was then that the situation began to deteriorate sharply. Hudson became painfully aware of his unresolved role and place within the royal circle. He no longer wanted to be perceived merely as the Queen's favorite or as a cute toy pet. He longed for respect as a mature and independent person, and undoubtedly, he would have been glad to earn that status as a captain. If understanding his desire is quite straightforward, as ambitions for self-respect and recognition are inherent to everyone, then understanding how he allowed these ambitions to become his downfall is much more complicated. In 1644, Hudson found himself in a very difficult situation. It all began with a conflict with Charles Croft, the brother of English Baron William Croft. Most likely the two frequently crossed paths and even interacted, as Croft was one of the influential landowning noblemen of that time. But at some point, on a day that proved to be decisive for Hudson, Croft, for reasons unknown, either did something or said something that deeply offended and hurt him. What exactly happened is unclear. Either Croft did something that displeased Hudson, or someone who was helping him did. The details are lost forever. As a result, Hudson challenged him to a duel to settle the conflict personally. The circumstances and exact reasons for this challenge remain unclear, as the surviving sources do not specify what Croft specifically did to insult or offend Hudson. Nevertheless, one thing is clear. Hudson felt he was worthy of defending his honor and dignity by any means. In that era, a duel meant that both participants demonstrated their resolve and courage, preparing for an encounter that could determine much, including the fate of each of them. Ready either to reconcile or to end their lives outright on the spot, Hudson and Croft found themselves with opposing intentions in this situation. One sought reconciliation or, conversely, wanted to stir conflict, while the other aimed to resolve everything with tragedy. Ultimately, Hudson committed a terrible crime. Croft, on the other hand, did not take the duel seriously. He came to the event with a toy water pistol, showing he did not intend to participate in earnest. Hudson, contrariwise, took what was happening far too seriously and ultimately shot Croft. In that era, duels were commonplace in England, and such brutal encounters did not cause much surprise among the population. However, the situation in France was different. There, a ban on duels had been enforced centuries earlier, and French authorities punished participation very harshly. This meant that Hudson's actions were immediately perceived as a crime requiring severe punishment. Moreover, French officials thought that, having killed an important person, as Croft was regarded as a significant figure, Hudson could face not just imprisonment, but a death sentence. However, fate suddenly changed thanks to the intervention of a person who sincerely cared for Hudson. Despite his misconduct, she decided to stand up for him and not remain indifferent to his fate. It was she, the Queen herself from France, who personally petitioned the French authorities for his mercy, pleading for his life to be spared. Her intercession made a great impression, and thanks to her efforts, Hudson was saved from execution. Instead of a death sentence, the French authorities decided to send him back to England, thus saving him from execution. This effectively ended his stay at the royal court and deprived him of his status as a valued and esteemed person among the English upper class. At one point, he could hope to continue his life and find a new path to success. However, tragic events unfolded swiftly and mercilessly. Having lost his courtly status and found himself in exile, Hudson decided to return home. Yet, his journey was once again met with misfortune. The ship he was traveling on was captured by pirates. This time, the criminals did not limit themselves to ordinary theft or intimidating crew and passengers, as they had done before, but took much more brutal control of the situation. At this moment, Hudson found himself in an incredibly difficult situation. But this time, the worst that could have happened to him. He was captured by notorious pirates renowned for their cruelty, descendants of the very Ottoman sea raiders who were infamous for their ruthlessness and bloody raids. Their reputation was supported by numerous brutal ship captures and their treatment of prisoners. And now, Hudson's fate could scarcely have been worse. When the pirate crew captured Hudson and several other Englishmen, they forcefully took them back to North Africa, intending to leave them there for the rest of their lives. This moment marked the beginning of a completely different life compared to his previous existence at the royal court where he had served before. The details of this harsh and unjust experience only became known many years later, when Hudson himself recounts in detail his years of torment and extreme suffering. He endured the worst types of abuse, facing constant moral and physical humiliation. Yet, astonishingly, this did not mark the end of his story. On the contrary, according to his own words, these painful years bestowed upon him something he had never dared to dream of. He claimed that during his 25 years of captivity, he miraculously grew physically and even doubled his height, reaching nearly 4 feet tall. However, no official records confirm these strange claims, nor is there any evidence that the terrible ordeals he endured in chains could have contributed to such growth. Fortunately for Hudson, his suffering ended when he finally gained his freedom. His release took place in the year 1617, during one of several English expeditions aimed at rescuing their captives. They managed to save him and bring him back to his homeland. Now he was already an elderly man, probably quite worn out after such a long and arduous ordeal. It is quite logical to assume that he would like to return to his former lifestyle, to the royal court. However, to his surprise, he faced a completely different reality than the one he knew before. While the pirate crew was holding him captive in North Africa, there had been radical changes within the very royal palace. The crown's power had passed to the new King Charles II, and his rule proved to be much more harsh and unpredictable than ever before. Even more worsening the situation, it seems that the Queen died around the same time Hudson returned home. Probably because of this, he entirely stopped dreaming of returning to the drastically changed palace. In his mature years, Hudson gained unique opportunities that had previously seemed unattainable. He met the historian James Reed, who intensified his efforts to capture in writing the chaotic and dramatic fate he had endured. After these details were documented, Hudson apparently realized that he needed to undertake something more daring and bold to ensure a respectable life for himself. Around the year 1676, he apparently decided to return to London, the place where he had spent a significant part of his passionate and eventful past. The first half of his life he had spent amidst luxury and wealth, although the reasons for his arrival into this circle are not explicitly mentioned. Likely, he hoped to receive some compensation for his long years of service at the court, which had made a vivid impression on him. But fate turned against him precisely at the moment he least expected. During that period, London was shaken by sharp religious and political upheavals. Conspiracy theories circulated claiming that Catholics were plotting to eliminate the king, and these rumors spread rapidly, spreading like wildfire across everything around. As a result, authorities began to target religious communities of the church, taking measures to suppress them in an attempt to secure the crown. It was during such difficult times, when dangerous rumors and malice circulated on the streets, that fate threw him a challenge. Firmly holding on to his religious faith, he found himself in the midst of these events in London. Soon after arriving there, the authorities arrested him on charges of belonging to the Catholic Church, which at that time was considered an enemy of the state. Thus, despite all his efforts, he was unable to break free from the chains of injustice. Long years of struggle passed, and after nearly 20 years, the authorities finally released him, restoring him to life among society. However, by that time, he was over 60, and many years that could have been another chance at a free life were already lost forever. Approximately 4 years after his release, the authorities once again granted him freedom, allowing him to return to ordinary life. Very little is known about the last years of his life. It is believed that by that time he was over 60, and most likely he faced several health problems. Day after day, he was haunted by thoughts of the past, of those glorious days when he served at the royal court, and of the trials he had endured. Before his death, it appears he was once again fortunate enough to receive a final reminder of his former days of glory. The last mention of him is linked to a payment made in the early 21st century. In 21st year of the new century, King Charles II sent him a certain compensation. It is unclear whether this was a full pension, which he had hoped to receive upon arriving in London, or some other form of recompense. Nonetheless, he received something for the hardships he endured and his faithful service. Still, it was not enough. Over many years of service at the court and his heroic efforts during the kingdom's turmoil, he remained in the shadows. When his last hour arrived, he left this world almost as an ordinary person. There are no precise details about the place of his death, how his final day unfolded, or where he was buried. All we can surmise is that he was probably deserving of more than he was able to receive. But fortunately, his legacy continues to live on in distant and vivid images. During the time he served at the court, he became an inspiration for many artists and cultural figures who drew inspiration from his fate and story. A portrait created by an artist became famous as a well-known depiction of a heroine named Catherine Hudson, alongside her loyal pet, a monkey. This image became so recognizable that poets and writers began composing poems and stories featuring him and his unusual friend as the main characters. In these literary works, painters and authors often lightly mocked his small stature to emphasize his uniqueness and memorable appearance. However, there are other, less respectful ways to honor a person's memory. In particular, in England, there are still several pubs that, despite the passage of years, continue to pay tribute to Hudson under names like Dwarf and Giant. These establishments are said to honor both Hudson and his tall, friendly companion, Evans, who served at the royal court. Such commemorations seem amusing and unusual, but I cannot help but think that perhaps these forms of remembrance, though unconventional, might have been more appreciated by Hudson himself if he could have received genuine recognition during his lifetime. Nevertheless, even after many years, he has not been entirely forgotten. In the early 2000s, one of the fashionable stores organized an auction where one of its famous pairs of trousers was exhibited, garments he wore during his performances for the royal court. The collector was so eager to acquire this piece of the past that he bid nearly 10,000 British pounds for it. Ultimately, Hudson spent the last years of his life in poverty and obscurity, yet his captivating and adventurous life remains one of the most unusual and vivid stories in history. If you enjoyed this description, you might consider leaving a review or continuing to follow similar fascinating stories, as they often hide incredible facts and moments worthy of remembrance.